Bro, what is Nintendo doing now, man? The Switch 2 holds the record for being the fastest and most successful game console launch ever, and yet despite that, Nintendo's decisions surrounding the Switch 2 are so bad that it feels like they are trying to sabotage themselves. Or are they? Nintendo's sending more mixed signals than that crazy ex-girlfriend you had back in your freshman year of college. Do they want third-party support or not? They say one thing and then they do something else. They're hot, then they're cold. They're yes, then they're no. They're in, then they're out. They're up, then they're down. They're wrong when it's right. It's black and it's white. They fight, they break up. They kiss, they make up. Like, come on, man. I wish I was kidding when I tell you this, but Nintendo has been telling developers that they should keep making their games and their ports for the old Switch 1 rather than making games for the Switch 2. And let's be real, us consumers, we can tell the lineup of games for the Switch 2 is still noticeably empty. But here's the thing, there actually might be some good reasoning. I know there might be some good reasoning behind Nintendo's decision here, and we're gonna get into that in a little bit. But man, at first glance, this seems like the wrong decision. So what exactly is going on here today? We're gonna answer that question, but first, what's going on, guys? Cheers. So this was first reported on by Digital Foundry. Nintendo reportedly withholds Switch 2 dev kits, directs devs towards OG Switch development instead. Who gets to make games for the Nintendo Switch 2? Developers large and small are reportedly having a hard time getting their hands on development kits for the Nintendo Switch 2. During the Digital Foundry live stream, senior staff writer and video editor John Lineman, or is it Lineman? Sorry if I mispronounced that. They explained that during the team's visit to Gamescom, which I believe was this past weekend, they spoke with a lot of developers that said they're unable to get Switch 2 development kits. So here's the quote. Many of them said the same thing. They want to ship on the Switch 2. They would love to do Switch 2 versions of their games, but they can't get the hardware. Some of these developers told Digital Foundry that they were told to ship their games on the original Nintendo Switch and rely on the Switch 2's backwards compatibility features to be accessible on the new console. Hey man, look, I know the Nintendo DS came out, but why don't you go ahead and just make your game for the Game Boy Advance? I mean, it works on the DS. I can just do that. Now, of course, a vast majority of the Switch 1's library is backwards compatible on the Switch 2, but developing natively for the Switch 2 would help developers optimize their game for the new console's beefier hardware. All right, writer and video producer Oliver McKenzie affirmed this report, saying that there have been, quote, some weird exclusions with some big developers struggling to get kits for games. My question is, okay, who are these big developers? Because we see lots of games from big developers coming down the pipeline for the Switch 2. So if they're coming, that means that they have dev kits and they're making games for the Switch 2. So like, who's missing? We're gonna talk about this a little bit later. We'll talk about a couple of developers that might be missing here, and it's mostly speculation, but we'll get into it. He added there were some weird inclusions as well. It's nice to see some indie developers have received kits. Some AAA developers aren't necessarily in the pipeline. Now, industry insider Nate the Hate actually went ahead and confirmed this as well, at least from their perspective. They were commenting on this forum here, famiboards.com. He said, quote, plenty of large dev studios lack dev kits. Another user said, I talked to some devs at Gamescom. Some did not have dev kits yet, but many had just received them. Consensus is that before launch, it was very hard to get any, and things are improving a lot now. So Nate the Hate responds saying, right, the situation is improving, but remains less than ideal as Nintendo's communication continues to be poor with many partners. Wow, bad communication from Nintendo. I mean, who could have imagined that? Am I right? Now, a few months ago, we actually saw this report over on Nintendo Life. Nintendo is prioritizing Switch 2 dev kits for indies needing extra oomph, says devs, a similar situation to the OG Switch. So we knew that Nintendo, at least from the indie perspective, was being a bit more selective, but according to these reports, it seems like even some of the bigger players in the field are not getting their hands on as many dev kits as they might need in order to make the games that they want to make for the Switch 2, which is weird because we saw, like, at the Indie Direct, we saw the Campfire game. They got their hands on a Switch 2, and that game was bizarre to say the least. Like, what even is that, right? Like, is it just because it was planned to have have, you know, webcam support. Nintendo was like, oh, okay, we'll treat you better because you're going to use one of our new accessories, right? Like, was that the strategy? I have no idea. But as I said before, this whole thing seems really weird to me because with the Nintendo Wii, there was a lack of great third-party support, at least at the beginning. And when we did get third-party support, like for the Call of Duty games or whatever, it was like, it wasn't great. And then the Wii U came out and there was some third-party support there at launch, but the console sold so poorly that after a while, third-party devs were like, okay, well, the console didn't sell well and it's outdated hardware, so we're not even going to bother. And so third-party support on the Wii U ended up not being what Nintendo wanted it to be. Fast forward to the first Switch coming out and it became a smash hit. Third-party devs started flocking back in saying, oh my god, wait a minute, we want to catch this bandwagon. And we did see a lot of third-party support on the Switch, even though some of it wasn't great. I mean, we're looking at like Hogwarts Legacy, like struggles to be on that console, right? They had to cut every corner possible for that game to actually work. And so what I'm wondering is, okay, does Nintendo need third-party support to sell units? The answer is no. We already, I mean, the data is the data. The Switch 2 is the fastest selling game console launch of all time. We know that Nintendo does not need third-party support to push units out the door, right? Out of the gate, we don't need to see big third-party support, but third-party support was still kind of important for the original Switch and its success, right? I mean, I have younger nephews and I remember when they got their first Switch, they were playing things like Fortnite on it exclusively, right? Like, I know we don't really like to think of Fortnite as like a third-party developer, right? But like, it's one of the biggest games on the planet, right? And so having third-party support on Nintendo consoles is important. Now, before launch, getting the dev kits in the hands of these third parties, it makes sense that it would be restricted because Nintendo didn't want leaks. However, I don't know if they realized, but the Switch 2 leaks started like a year before the console came out, okay? And that's just what happens when you stockpile your inventory for a very long period of time. Eventually the leaks come out. And so leaks happen regardless, but at least you could argue that before launch, that could be a good argument. Like, they don't want a lot of their secrets to leak. It happened anyway, but at least you could say that's what they want, that they were trying to avoid that even though they failed. But now we are a few months in and devs still not getting enough dev kits seems really bizarre. So there's only a couple of things that I can think of when it comes to what strategy Nintendo might be taking here, because the idea that dev kits are like hard for them to make or manufacture or ship out, like, that's pish posh. That's fake news. That's not real. Now, I'm not saying it's not hard, but I'm saying like Nintendo's been in business for so long and the Switch 2 hardware has been in production for so long that is clearly not the case. Okay, that is obviously not the case, at least not anymore. So one of the reasons that this could be happening is that Nintendo at launch didn't necessarily want a huge lineup of third-party games to come out. That's not to say they don't want third-party support on the console at all, but think of it like this. If the consumer is price sensitive and they're strapped for cash, they only have so much money that they can spend on entertainment. If they're already going to be buying $500 or spending $500 on a console because it's going to have Mario Kart World, so few people bought it without Mario Kart World, right? So let's be real, they're spending $500 on the console. Nintendo wants to make sure that the most attractive games for the console at launch are Nintendo games, because I'm sure you guys already know this, but Nintendo makes way more money off of Nintendo games than they do off of third-party games, of course. So the idea is that at launch, Nintendo wants all of the Nintendo fans to buy all of the Nintendo games. And if there's, 50, 60 games coming out at launch, well, I mean, that's competition. And why would you want competition when you make the most money selling your own content? Now, the other argument there is that Nintendo probably didn't want the Switch 2 to just be the PS4 port machine on day one. They don't want people to look at the Switch 2 and look at the launch lineup and say, wow, this console is a waste of money because all of these games I already have on the PS4 or PS5. I think the logic there does make sense. Now, to say all these third-party devs would all choose to launch within the same window is a little bit naive. I think these developers, as much as they would want to be there on launch day, they would recognize that, okay, well, let's say Rockstar's dropping a game on launch week, like, okay, well, maybe we wait a couple of weeks because clearly people are going to buy that one and we're going to get overshadowed. You know what I'm saying? So I do think these developers, they're not stupid, right? They have research teams. They probably would have spaced out their releases a little bit, but even still, the sort of loose framework of the argument does make sense. I mean, look at all of the shovelware on the Switch, look at all the shovelware on the Wii. Maybe Nintendo said, hey, we don't want that to be the launch experience of the Switch 2. Maybe next year, 2 years down the line, okay, fine, then you could start to port whatever you want to the Switch, but at least at launch we want it to feel like a special new Nintendo experience, not just the PS4 port machine. The other thing that we have to consider is like which of these big publishers and studios are missing from the Switch 2. This Reddit user does a sort of rough draft of what we've seen so far. We know that Capcom, Square Enix, Bethesda, which implies Microsoft and Activision Blizzard, 2K, Blooper Team, Respawn, so presumably EA, Atlas, Sega Namco, and FromSoft, CD Projekt Red, Epic Games, Marvelous, Konami, and Koei Tecmo, as well as Atari, because I think Bubsy is coming out for the Switch 2 as well. We have Team Cherry and Supergiant for the indies. We can also assume Ubisoft and Rockstar because of leaks potentially. Also, someone said Star Wars Outlaws comes out in a few weeks, so Ubisoft definitely has dev kits. Borderlands is a Take-Two studio, and WWE 2K is already out. I don't think it's a reach to think Rockstar has dev kits already. So it's like, okay, if we know all of these people have dev kits confirmed, then what's missing, right? Like, these are some of the heaviest hitters in the industry, right? Well, the answer is that some of these teams, like saying Bethesda has a dev kit implies Microsoft, Activision, and Blizzard all have them, is like, maybe, right? Maybe, but like you probably need more than one for all those teams, right? You probably need multiple to get, especially for multiple games, multiple studios and multiple things coming out from these different game developers. Like, they probably need a couple, right? And so it could be the case that it's a slow rollout for these teams, even though we see some games coming down the pipeline. That is totally possible. Or maybe it's the case that there are some big heavy hitters that don't have dev kits that want some. So a couple that come to mind for me, maybe companies like NetEase or companies like HoYoverse. These game companies might want to put games on the Switch 2, and if they confirmed have dev kits, you can put them in the comment section below. I have no idea if they do or not, but like, they're obviously missing from this list here, and I haven't heard anybody talk about them. But you know, you're thinking about things like, obviously Genshin Impact had a reveal trailer for the original Switch, but it never came about. Gee, I wonder why. So it wouldn't be a stretch to say that maybe Nintendo just doesn't like HoYoverse. I mean, you know, Genshin Impact clearly was very, very inspired by Breath of the Wild, and so like, why would Nintendo want a free version of Breath of the Wild on their game? Now, I'm not saying that, you know, Genshin is the same as Breath of the Wild. Some crazy people would argue that it's better than Breath of the Wild. I would say obviously Breath of the Wild is a superior experience in my opinion, but I played a ton of both. But okay, so that would explain why we don't have like Zenless Zone Zero or Honkai Star Rail or these games having ports or releases for Nintendo products, right? Nintendo consoles. Same thing with NetEase, right? So maybe it's just the case that like some of the big heavy hitting free to play sort of mobile adjacent studios don't have them, right? Because to say that like HoYoverse and NetEase are not big studios, I mean, they are like objectively massive studios, right? And so it is objectively true that if you say that, you know, some big developers don't have dev kits and those are the ones you're referring to, then your statement is accurate, right? Like, that could be the case, but it wouldn't make sense to then direct them towards OG Switch development, because we know something like, again, Genshin Impact doesn't seem like it's ever coming to the Switch, right? And surely I don't need to remind you, but Marvel Rivals was one of the biggest game releases in the last year. I mean, it was super popular. It was free to play. It's a well-known IP, and that is NetEase. I can easily imagine that they would want Marvel Rivals on the Switch too. It certainly can handle it. And as evidence of this, there were reports back in July that Marvel Rivals didn't come out on the Switch 2 at launch, because in a recent interview, Marvel Rivals game director Guangyung Chen, sorry if I mispronounced that, confirmed that despite their team's interest in getting their games ported over to Switch 2, they're still in the process of obtaining the development machine and don't have the access to the hardware they need. So it would be kind of shocking to me, honestly, if they still didn't have one almost 2 months later, but maybe this is what they're referring to. Some of these devs at Gamescom are in the same boat as NetEase, right? So the whole situation is so bizarre. Like I said before, and I don't mean to repeat myself here, but it would make sense that they wouldn't want it to be the PS4 port machine, but at the same time, there's other solutions than simply not giving third-party developers dev kits, right? Like they could coordinate release dates and do things in a better, more efficient and more civil manner, right? It almost seems hostile that they would intentionally not give them dev kits or withhold some or trickle them out, you know, drip feed them to these developers. I have no idea. But again, on the flip side, you would think that they would want more third-party support. So the whole situation is just very bizarre. According to Nate, it seems like it's getting better, and obviously now that the Switch 2 has sold really well at launch, you know, these third-party developers are going to want to get in if they weren't already all in before, which I imagine they were because the Switch 1 sold incredibly well. But the fact that this situation is confusing to begin with is just yet another big question mark on the launch of the Switch 2. Like, you've got this great hardware that, I mean, I have a Switch 2. It's actually great. Like, as much as there's all this hate going on around it, the hardware itself is good. I mean, playing Donkey Kong Bonanza, playing Mario Kart World, like the games look and play and run beautifully, and you could do it all handheld. It's fantastic. It's bigger. The screen looks great. I know it's not OLED, chill out, but it still looks fantastic. There's never been a second of me playing it where I'm like, man, this sucks because it's not OLED. It still looks good. So you have this great console. It's a follow-up to a smash hit, the Switch 1, and yet there's a lot of these weird blunders where, like, we've got the game key cards that, you know, developers are forced to rely on because they can't buy varying sizes of Switch cards. Why are you only manufacturing 64GB cards for the Switch 2? That makes no sense. That goes against all logic. So you've got that going on. Then you've got the remote bricking of Switch 2 consoles. We still don't have release dates for things like Metroid Prime 4. Like, we still don't have any news about an upcoming 3D Mario game for the Switch 2, although that could change, I guess, with the upcoming Nintendo Direct that is likely to come in September. They also raised the prices of a lot of the accessories and amiibos and things surrounding the Switch 2, as well as the original Switch. So again, it just seems like another chapter in this bizarre tale of the Switch 2 launch being so successful, but with like all this other surrounding noise that just feels really weird. It's just like, what you're winning. Why you're winning? Why are you doing these things? We've won. The console war is over. Nintendo obviously won. So what's with all these weird decisions? I don't know, guys. You can let me know in the comment section below. While you're down there, drop a thumbs up on the video. It really helps out small channels like this, and if you're new here, consider subscribing for more gaming news. And with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Peace.